in the future when projects run, they're going to understand how you do your work and be able to actually accommodate the way things operate rather than sometimes just blindly making changes without understanding that downstream impact.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to another episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers, and I get the privilege in each of these episodes to sit with different BPM practitioners that are working in organizations, putting these things into practice. They're not just learning about them in theory and I guess hypothesizing about what could happen and what challenges may come our way, but they're actually putting BPM into practice. They're encountering the various challenges and hurdles and curveballs that come along with it, but they are pioneering through that. They're seeing real value get delivered to their organization. And I think that's one of the most valuable parts of this series is being able to learn from these people that are, daily putting these things into practice. And today I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with Fraser Keetley. Now, Fraser is a process analyst in the superannuation industry, but has also worked in government and also financial services. So quite a diverse range of industries there. I'm really excited for this interview. Fraser, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Daniel. It's really good to be on board.
That's great. So what we might do, and this is what we normally do at the beginning of these conversations, is I pass it off to you to give us a bit of a context and background as on your journey, because I think that's really important for the audience to understand is, well, who is this person that we're listening to? What is their background and their context? And because that does frame, I guess, the rest of the conversation. But maybe start with, where did business process management first pique your interest, and take us on a journey leading up to today?
Okay, so I started out working primarily in IT as a systems analyst and a BA. And one thing that really sort of piqued my interest in business process management was the disparity between the way like large-scale IT projects work and the way they interacted with the business and its processes. And what I sort of noticed as I worked on these really large projects was that there was always a difficulty understanding the impact that some of these IT projects would have on the process, because the processes weren't necessarily fully understood, but the project was fully understood, if that makes sense.
Right.
So I actually looked into getting a sort of scholarship into QUT through the organization I was working in at the time. And I was lucky enough to receive that to sort of pursue my aspirations of becoming a business process analyst. So I did that part-time and learnt from a lot of great people at QUT. And when I finished, I moved into the financial services area to start sort of practicing some of those things that I'd learnt in those classes and in industry in general.
That's great. And when an organization is adopting business process management, maybe they do very little of it, or maybe they do none at all. What are some of the biggest challenges that they're going to face when, I guess, embarking on that journey of understanding, well, what is it that we do? How do we currently deliver value? What are some challenges that may arise when doing that?
So my thoughts on this have always been that buy-in can be some of the biggest challenges in terms of your top down, kind of like your top down and then your bottom up approach is like, the people that are doing a lot of the work can be difficult to access, either due to general availability or because they're resistant to someone coming in and scrutinizing the work that they do. And sometimes top down, it can be difficult because the challenge there is that you're presenting quite an investment of time into something that people at a high level might consider as like a known quantity. So you kind of have to have that push-pull relationship with both of these user groups, and the challenge is kind of telling them that you're here to sort of deliver a greater level of understanding and value to the organization through that understanding.
Yes. Okay. And I'd imagine that depending on who you're talking to, whether it is that top down or the bottom up, whether it's the process practitioners or the senior leadership, you'd be using different language maybe, or you'd be communicating in a different way to address their needs and their wants.
Yeah, for sure. I think the tailoring of communication is probably the biggest part of work in this industry, right? I mean, we rely on our ability to communicate to ensure that we're understanding what everybody wants and how to get a win for everybody. So, I mean, when we talk to somebody from the bottom, well, when I talk to somebody who's a practitioner, my biggest sort of win for them is like by understanding your processes at the level that you do them. You know, in the future, when projects run, they're going to understand how you do your work and be able to actually accommodate the way things operate rather than sometimes just blindly making changes without understanding that downstream impact. And for people who are in a higher level of management who don't see all of the individual components of their processes, the real selling point is that visibility and accountability to different people within the organization that they might not have had in the first place.
Yes, right. And I guess for the process practitioners, for example, they need to feel comfortable with these changes because they're the ones that are, carrying out the work. They're conducting the tasks or the activities. And if you come along and make changes and force it on them or just expect them to change what they've been doing for the last 6, 12, 18 months or 5 years, you potentially could face some resistance there.
Yeah, for sure. And, you can understand why some people feel that way because in some large organizations, not everybody's able to have their voices heard. And I think as process analysts, we have a real opportunity to offer these people as the practitioners a way to kind of voice the way they do work and why they do work. Because sometimes the biggest issue is that you get projects come through and they're kind of like, well, this is the way you're going to work from now on. But there might be a very good reason why people are working in a certain way. Is it because that the process isn't working, or is it there an issue with the culture around the work that's being done? And that's another part of the value proposition for BPM is you're identifying opportunities, not just at a sort of brainstorming and working out between yourselves what the opportunities are, but also identifying opportunities that have evolved sort of organically within the organization and seeing if they themselves are the solution to some of the problems in the organization.
Yes, because they're most likely the ones that are in the best position to identify what are the pain points, what are the problems, how are we currently delivering this value or delivering this task, and how could it be improved? I think if you leverage that can be very powerful.
Yeah, and it's a huge resource that sometimes goes by the wayside because I mean, there can be a directive that's set by the organization, or there's been a big change in the way the industry you currently operate within operates. I mean, COVID is a great example right now. And there's this real impetus for change, and change is important, but it's also important to understand the resourcing that you have and sometimes extract that value from those people. And it also helps increase that buy-in. If you kind of feel that everybody is being listened to and brought on board, and you're modeling the processes and you're capturing the way they work, and they're able to see the future state as well as the current state that they actually do being captured, then there's a real sense that I'm confident the changes are going to meet my current needs and also the business's future needs. So it's a very useful conduit.
Yes, great. And speaking about COVID and I guess the turbulent nature of the year we've just had, I guess, and also because you do work in a large organization here in Australia. So, I mean, obviously, some areas of Australia have gotten off lighter than others, but how has BPM played a part in this year for where you're working currently?
I think it's played a really big part in the sense that there's a real emphasis on understanding the way we work more than ever. because I mean, you see in industries, they're being tested in a way that they've never been tested before. So there's a real requirement to understand the fundamentals of the way you do your work. I mean, particularly when resourcing can be increased or decreased, some businesses are getting a lot of new staff in to handle the influx of people on COVID payments. There's a really large, but there's also the possibility that you've actually lost resources either due to geographical constraints or just general redefining of your business's team structures. So I think really what we've got with the challenge of COVID is the opportunity for business process management to kind of understand the way we're working and identify opportunities that we previously didn't know existed.
Yes, that's great. And also talking about, I guess, from that executive level, from that senior leadership level, when they look at business process management, whether it's currently being done or they're yet to sort of buy into the idea, they're going to want to understand, well, what's the return on investment? Where's the value coming from, and how long is it going to take before we realize that value? So do you have any examples of I guess some wins that you've experienced, you've seen, or maybe you've heard of, where an organization has put business process management into practice? And I'll leave that up to you to decide what that looks like, whether it's a small micro tweak of a process or whether that's a radical innovation or anywhere in between. But do you have any examples of, an organization that has seen significant value from business process management?
Yeah, and I think I can draw to my most recent experiences in financial services and superannuation. I've worked on projects that focus on understanding the mapping between the way processes are executed and where, say, obligations to regulators apply. Same with the way we manage risk and the controls that mitigate risks, and the ability to model your processes and then map your processes to where those risks and controls appear, so that you're like, well, we know in this process that this risk can occur because of these reasons, and because we've identified this risk, we're able to mitigate that risk through a number of comprehensive controls. And I mean, if you look at the financial services industry in the past several years, there was a big focus on AML and CTF, which is like anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism funding, and focusing on those aspects to identify risks within processes where that could occur meant that we had the ability to yield a lot of value by identifying those risks and then making comprehensive controls, or identifying what controls existed within the process, so that we could determine whether or not we were, meeting the necessary obligations in industry.
Yes. Yep. Okay. No, that's good. And obviously we've spoken about getting buy-in from, the process practitioners and also from that executive level, senior leadership. But for someone that's listening right now, that maybe they're about to embark on that journey where they themselves are trying to get buy-in for BPM. Maybe they're listening to this conversation. This is the icing on the cake for them, that BPM is valuable and we need it in our organization. But what are some objections they might face when, I guess, presenting it to that senior leadership team? I guess a big part of that would come down to how well you present it, how well you articulate it and communicate it. But what are some of the more common challenges or objections someone would face when presenting that?
I guess one of the common objections that has happened in the past for me and for others in the industry is sometimes you'll talk to that leadership team, and some of them kind of see business process as an accessory to the projects that are going on within the organization. Right. Some projects implement some process modeling exercises, and then they're kind of like, well, processes are a known quantity. Right. Why do we need to go into this sort of large undertaking where we kind of build an architecture and we populate that architecture with all of our processes, because that can take a lot of time and effort to implement. and the objection can sometimes just be, well, we don't have the resources to undertake that kind of exercise.
Right.
I mean, another objection typically can just be simply that there's not enough people with the skill set to do that kind of work, because the assumption is that business process analysts are singular. There's only so many of them within the industry. It's a limited skill set, so we can't always we can't bring on enough people to map our organization because it's so big, it's so unwieldy. We're just not going to do that. So I think with these instances, the thing that you need to focus on, at least for myself, is the ability for business process management is an iterative process. It's not Rome wasn't built in a day situation.
Yes.
It's an iterative process, and value can be yielded from BPM in stages as we kind of build a comprehensive picture of the way the organization works and where our biggest pain points and our biggest opportunities exist. So, I mean, that's kind of the counter to some of those objections that we typically see with, business leaders. And I think sometimes another objection you see, in addition to the resourcing and assuming that we already understand our processes, so we don't need to go through this exercise, is just time. Business, like I said before, the business process management exercise is iterative, and some businesses want to see value delivered in 6 months or even only a year, and their picture of what it looks like might be very different to what's achievable, and that can be some of the biggest impediments to delivering on that kind of capability with the organization.
Right. And I think that's a great point there about realizing or seeing the value being delivered in stages along the way, because I think there are plenty of organizations out there that embarked on a process mapping exercise maybe 2, 3, 5 years ago, but there wasn't a bigger purpose behind it. There wasn't a bigger why behind why they were doing it. Maybe the only why they had was because, well, our competitors doing it, so maybe we should do it as well. But and then they get to a point where they've got all of this documentation with no intention to do anything with it, with no intention to manage it or improve it, because they say, well, it's the way we've always done it. So that guy's been doing the same job for 5, 10, 15 years. Why does it need to be documented down? But I think, that's a very risky position to be in for an organization. If you've got people walking in and out of your door every day, and you don't know what's going to happen, like in between when they leave the office space and when they come back, they could win the gold lotto and all of a sudden be off on Hamilton Island living their best life, or they could be, come off far worse, whatever that might be. So I think, there's got to be more than just documentation.
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. There is a lot of project effort that goes into producing documentation and different forms to different levels of quality of process modeling and mapping. And the project being a 6 to 18 month beast, it goes through all of its paces, it delivers on the objective, or maybe it doesn't deliver on the objective. And the documentation is it's bundled up into a shared drive or a SharePoint, and no one ever hears about it ever again. And with sort of a unified business process modeling capability and management capability within business, you're able to really leverage the project's effort in a long-term way, rather than just simply abandoning the documentation because the project's like, well, we've done our work, and that's it. And I've worked in projects where, I think anybody can sympathize if you've worked in a large scale project and then you've been told that, someone did this years ago. And your first question will always be, oh, well, where's the documentation? I'd really love to see that stuff because it'll give me a lot of information about how to go, that person left the organization years ago. It was in a shared drive or on his personal. No one can find it anymore. And there's this treasure trove of documentation and process models that in a business that is geared towards business process management, you wouldn't have that sort of issue, and you would have a current state that would just take so much time off of the kind of effort that goes into projects trying to identify how we do work in the organization currently. And there's always a big opportunity there that can sometimes be missed. Yes.
And so another topic that is quite interesting at the moment that I'm find is, and I've had this conversation with a number of different people, and I've also read it in a couple of articles and different reports as well, is this idea, but like this, I guess, balance between the idea of preservation versus creation when it comes to business processes. So, preserving the process that is currently in existence and I guess making continual tweaks where we're living in a time and age where startup companies, and we've seen this happen over the last 10, 15 years, they can come up with an idea that completely disrupts an entire industry because they're starting from scratch. So they can make any decision they want in order to, how we're going to deliver value to this industry. And we've seen complete industries being totally disrupted by this radical innovation. And now organizations have been forced to think along those same lines as well. Yes, we can continually tweak our processes and the way we've always delivered value. But sometimes it's necessary to, to radically innovate. How do we create the new future? How do we, instead of being more of a passive organization that sits back and just follows trends and what are other organizations doing, that versus, let's why don't we create the new future? Why don't we be the pioneers? So I guess talking about it from a process perspective, how do you balance that? How do you know when you've tweaked a process enough, and how do you know when the right time is to, let's totally disrupt what we've always done because this is going to be the new way moving forward?
Yeah, and I think it's actually a very difficult question when you think about it. Because when I think about from my previous experiences, sometimes we're really trying to get the fundamentals right to ensure that we can respond more agilely, if that's even a word, agilely, to respond with more agility in the future. And I think if you're a business that's looking to be like those disruptors, I mean, one thing that I think was explained to me when I was still in university by one of the lecturers I had was this concept of sometimes the innovation doesn't necessarily need to come from just thinking up a new need or want within your own industry, but looking to other industries and the way they do things to kind of go, there's something in, say, if I'm in financial services, there's something in the tourism industry or the logistics or some sort of large scale industry that isn't the same as mine, but they do something that I would never have thought to do in my business. Like, how would that look like in my business? And there's a real sort of opportunity there to kind of soak up that knowledge from other industries that you don't compete with, to kind of go, how could we apply some of those ideas? How could we do some of the things that you would never have seen someone doing here? But it is a very difficult question when I think about it from my previous experiences.
Yes. And I guess looking forward to the future and over the next 2, 3, 5 years, BPM has evolved and will continue to evolve, and how we manage and improve our business processes. And I guess especially now we've got technology coming out, RPA, we've got process mining, we've got all of these different, I guess, current topics and trends at the moment we're seeing. But I guess not everything is applicable to every organization where they currently sit. But I guess looking forward over the next 2, 3, 5 years, where do you think organizations should be spending their time, effort, and energy, whether that is on new technology or whether that is just to get the foundations right before you jump to new technology? But yeah, what would you say?
Yeah, I as you might have guessed from some of the stuff that I've said before in this interview, is I'm a big adherent of getting the fundamentals correct. because one thing I've found is one of the big ways for an organization to have a lot of difficulty has been the big bang approach. Let's do everything all at once, and it's going to be great. But it can be a very stressful activity, because you're basically trying to tie your shoes while you're running down a runway or something, and you haven't even invented the shoes yet.
Yes.
But what I do see in the future, and I mean I even see it now, is the rise of processes being integrated into a lot of the ways work had been done previously. So I guess the way I describe that is, I mean, you mentioned RPA and it taking over a lot of sort of different types of manual work. We usually thought about sort of full automation for some things, but now RPA sort of come in and it's like a user, it's like automation, but it does a lot of amazing things for these sort of highly manual, repeatable tasks. But you also see these application suites coming in like Appian that really leverage the process modeling aspect to show the way code works and the way applications run with these very interesting process models. What I do see in the next in the short term to medium term is, I think, a real emphasis on understanding current state and using that understanding of current state by modeling out your processes, understanding how and why people work the way they do, and using that understanding to implement targeted improvements. That's the thing I really kind of want to emphasize, is the concept of targeted improvements, especially in a very competitive working environment. Businesses are going to have less resources, and they're going to need to make every decision count when they go to invest in new projects. Yeah. And I'm sure that a lot of this can be leveraged by some of the new technologies that are going to be coming out in the future. And if depending on how RPA plays out in terms of, well, in the future, will we be looking? This is more towards the medium term. Will we be looking at how, say, artificial intelligence and RPA play together? If we're looking at artificial intelligence taking over some of the things that RPA had previously been doing itself for more complicated work that's also highly manual and repeatable as well.
Yes.
But I think just given the way the competitive environment with a post-COVID world goes, it's going to be understanding those fundamentals and making very targeted, very informed decisions about what changes we're going to make in the future and how they're going to affect the business, so that we can understand the value and the benefit with a lot of clarity, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. That's really good. And for someone listening right now that, maybe this is the first time they're learning about business process management, or maybe that, they've heard about the topic before, but it's really not something that's fostered at their organization. Where would you encourage them to go to learn more about BPM? Because obviously there's many resources out there. We've got books and reports and podcasts and the internet, but sometimes it can all be a bit overwhelming. Where do I begin? Who do I trust? And what's the right information for our current situation at my organization?
So I leveraged this resource a lot when I was in uni, and I still use it today, is BP Trends. It's a lot of industry professionals that write different articles on different issues within the industry. I think what they put together is really good. There's more recent articles regarding BPM in a sort of slower working environment because of the changes that are currently happening in the business right now. How do we handle that in the future? I think that's a really good resource, as BP Trends.
Yeah. Okay. That's awesome. That's great. Well, Fraser, obviously in a 30-minute conversation, we can only scrape the surface of what there is to learn about business process management. But I think the really powerful or valuable thing about our conversation today is, you're putting this stuff into practice. You're currently working in an organization where you're understanding, well, how can we improve the business, the way that the business delivers value? And I think that's really valuable for different, BPM practitioners, those that are also in other organizations, or those that are just starting out on their journey. Maybe they're studying at university or something like that. But being able to listen and learn from someone that is facing the current obstacles and challenges and hurdles, and then also gaining some wins there, and seeing how it delivers value to their organization. And I think the ultimate thing is, if despite the brief conversation we've had, if the audience can walk away just with one piece of information or one thing that was valuable, that stood out to them, that either challenges their thinking, challenges the way their mindset, or even sparks a conversation back at their organization, I think that's a really valuable win out of this conversation today. So I just want to thank you, Fraser, for sitting down with me and sharing your experience and story so far.
Well, thank you for having me, Daniel. It's very much appreciated.